She gave water to a wounded Apache. The next day, his warriors surrounded her ranch. Dry Hollow wasn't a place for surprises. It was a town that clung to routine like it clung to its dust, quiet, sun-beaten, and slow to forget. People didn't ask questions here, not unless they already knew the answer. And if they didn't like what they saw, they looked away. That was the rule, unwritten but unbreakable. Hannah Moore had learned this the hard way. A widow before 30, she lived alone on the edge of town, tending to a patch of land and a half-broken fence that didn't keep anything out except conversation. The town had stopped acknowledging her after the funeral, not in cruelty, just absence. The kind that leaves a chill not from the cold, but from the silence it drapes over you. That morning, the sky was still too pale to decide on heat or cold. Hannah carried a wooden bucket to the well, just like every other day, just like every other silence. But something shifted when she saw the figure slumped by her fence. At first, he looked like driftwood, discarded and forgotten. Then she noticed the blood. His skin was dark, his clothes torn, and the symbols etched onto the leather across his chest said one thing clear to anyone from these parts: Apache. She should have gone back inside. That's what the town would have done. That's what her late husband would have told her to do: lock the door, close the curtains, let the desert decide his fate. But she didn't. She knelt, poured water into her palm, raised it to his cracked lips. He flinched, not in fear but in disbelief, as if he'd forgotten what kindness tasted like. He didn't speak, and she didn't ask him to. No one saw her that day. No neighbors peered from behind curtains, no sheriff rode by. But something shifted, deep under the surface. A thread tugged loose. Because in Dry Hollow, giving water to a stranger wasn't just rare, it was a question that didn't have an easy answer. She didn't know it yet, but that single act would echo far beyond her land. It would stir shadows, draw judgment, and awaken debts buried beneath history and hatred. But in that moment, it was just a woman, a bucket of water, and a choice. And sometimes that's all it takes. By sunrise, the wind in Dry Hollow carried a different weight. It wasn't just heat or dust this time. It was tension. The kind that makes animals quiet and keeps doors half shut. Hannah woke early, as always, to the creak of her porch and the rustle of chickens. But what she saw from her front step froze her in place. They were there, more than a dozen Apache riders, silent, still, like spirits risen from the earth itself. They formed a wide arc just beyond her fence line, their faces unreadable beneath the rising sun. No weapons drawn, no words spoken, just presence absolute and unmistakable. Takoda stood among them, the man she had given water to. He wasn't leaning anymore. He stood tall now, steady, the blood from yesterday gone, but the scar across his cheek catching light like a quiet declaration. His eyes met hers, not thankful, not demanding, just seeing, really seeing. Hannah's hands didn't shake as she stepped off the porch. She didn't call for help, didn't run. Instead, she walked to the well like it was any other morning and began to draw water. It was the town that panicked. By noon, whispers had outpaced horses. They say she sheltered one of them. She fed him. They're here for her must be. Maybe she invited them. The theories spun fast and wild, tangled in old fears and older ignorance. No one asked Hannah. No one came to her gate. They just turned their backs a little harder, spoke her name with sharper edges. Sheriff Maddox showed up just before dusk, not with a badge but with questions that sounded like accusations. "You gave him water?" he asked. She nodded. "He was dying," she said simply. "He didn't hurt anyone." "But he could have," Maddox muttered. "You didn't know." She didn't argue, just met his gaze with one that didn't need defending. "And yet," she said, "I still did it." By nightfall, the warriors had gone, silent as they came. No harm done, no threat left behind. Just an image burned into memory, a widow drawing water surrounded by men the town feared but never truly understood. Inside her house, Hannah lit a lantern, not for light, for steadiness. The room stayed quiet, and so did she. Because deep down, she knew this wouldn't be the last time someone misunderstood her. But kindness, she believed, didn't ask for applause, and it sure as hell didn't apologize. The next day, Hannah found him again, this time upright, standing near the barn with a quiet that didn't ask permission. Takoda hadn't left. No knock on the door, no sign of intention. Just a presence like the wind or the fence. Not invasive, but impossible to ignore. She watched him for a long moment, unsure if this was gratitude or something else. He didn't explain, and she didn't ask. He simply picked up a fallen post from her broken corral and wordlessly began mending it. That was how it started. Each morning after that he was there, fixing, hauling, chopping wood, never inside the house, never crossing a boundary. He drank from the well, not her cups. He moved like someone trained to disappear when needed, and to endure being watched without flinching. There were no smiles, no introductions, but there were nods. There were shared glances. There was something slow and wordless building between them, like a bridge made of gesture instead of timber. Hannah felt it most in the small silences, when she set a second loaf of bread out and it was gone by morning, when he handed her a tool before she reached for it, when he stopped hammering just as her hands stilled in the laundry, like they moved by the same rhythm now, without knowing who led. At the well they often stood within arm's length but said nothing. She would draw water. He would hold the bucket steady. And for a moment, time seemed to pause, two strangers bound not by past or promise, but by the quiet insistence of necessity and something softer than survival. The town didn't like it. Someone threw a rock through her window one night. Another carved the word traitor into the gate. Hannah didn't fix the word. She left it there like a warning or maybe a dare. Takoda saw it too. He didn't react. But the next morning he sharpened her axe and left it by the door. She never asked if he'd ever meant to stay this long, and he never asked if he was welcome. But in the way he swept the porch when she was gone, in the way she made stew large enough for two, in the way they stood side by side when the sheriff rode by again without stopping, they both knew. In the stillness of Dry Hollow, amid suspicion and silence, two people had begun to share something rare. Not friendship, not love, not yet, just space. And in a land like this, that was a beginning. Brody Whitman had never liked being ignored, especially not by women he believed owed him something. And Hannah Moore, quiet, alone, with land that touched his, was someone he once offered a deal to. She declined, politely, firmly. And that, in Brody's world, was a declaration of war. So when word spread that the Apache was still around, living like a ghost on her property, Brody didn't send a letter or a warning. He sent fire. It came late. The kind of night where even the stars held their breath. The first scream was from the hens. The second, from the wind catching flame. Hannah woke to red blooming outside her window, the chicken coop lit like a funeral pyre. She grabbed a pail, bare feet crunching across dirt, heart a drumbeat of disbelief and fury. But as she reached the edge of the yard, the light shifted, and she saw them. Three men, faces half covered, fading into the shadows behind the smoke. One of them paused, raised a torch as if to throw it farther, toward the barn, toward her house. And then he froze. Takoda stepped into the firelight like it was made for him. Smoke curled around his shoulders, turning him into a silhouette, tall, still, unarmed but unmistakably dangerous. The man with the torch hesitated, then lowered it, then dropped it. Takoda didn't speak. He didn't raise a hand. He just walked forward, slow and steady, until he stood between Hannah and whatever came next. Brody emerged from behind the shed like a man expecting obedience. He looked Takoda up and down, laughed once, a short, sharp sound like something caught in his throat. "You think this place'll protect you?" he said, voice tight with disbelief. "You think she will?" Takoda didn't blink. "She gave you a drink," Brody sneered, "and you think that makes you something." Still no words, but something shifted in Brody's face, something that looked like fear disguised as anger. He spit on the ground, stepped back, and signaled the others to go. The night swallowed them as quickly as it had given them. Hannah stood there, hands still holding the useless bucket, chest heaving. Takoda turned only when it was over, eyes meeting hers in a way that said everything he hadn't. He had stood for her, not because she was weak or because she asked, but because he knew, perhaps more than anyone, that wounds don't always bleed. Some sit beneath the skin, deeper than knives, burning quieter than fire. And sometimes the most broken are the ones who refuse to let someone else be broken too. That night, Hannah didn't sleep. Neither did Takoda. They sat on opposite ends of the porch, firelight flickering low between them, not to keep warm, but to remember kindness had a cost. The fire had left a scar on the earth. The coop was a smoldering heap, the air still thick with the smell of charred wood. Hannah spent the next morning in silence, raking ash into piles, her hands working while her mind spiraled inward. But it wasn't until dusk, when she went searching for the old deed papers, that she uncovered something that burned deeper than last night's flames. It was a letter, tucked in the back of a drawer, under tax receipts and faded photographs. Folded neatly, addressed to a man she hadn't spoken of aloud in over a year. The handwriting was unmistakable. It belonged to her late husband. She unfolded it slowly, her thumb tracing each word like it might cut her. He had been planning to sell, not just the house, the well, the surrounding land, all of it. Signed letters of intent to Brody Whitman, dated weeks before his accident. The same Brody who'd offered her help after the funeral, who smiled too much when she said no. Alongside the letter was a map, rough, hand-sketched, circles drawn in pencil marking points across her property. One was around the well. That's when the ache came. Not sharp, not fresh, but the deep kind. The ache of knowing that what you called home was only ever a transaction to someone else. That what kept you going was never part of someone else's plan. She didn't cry. There were no tears left for that man. What stung wasn't betrayal, it was blindness. She'd believed in his decency long after it died. Outside, the wind picked up. Dust swept across the yard. Takoda sat beneath the tree line, sharpening a piece of wood into something unspoken. He didn't look up, but she knew he felt her watching. She stepped off the porch, letter in hand. "I didn't know," she said, voice dry as the dirt between them. Takoda didn't answer. He didn't need to. There was something in the stillness that answered for him. "I did." And yet he'd stayed. That night Hannah didn't eat. She didn't light a lamp. She sat at the table with the papers in front of her and made a choice. She would not sell. She would not surrender. And she would not carry silence like a shield anymore. The land didn't belong to her husband or Brody or the town that had turned away. It belonged to the truth. And now that she had it, she wasn't letting go. In a town built on looking the other way, Hannah had opened. The courthouse in Dry Hollow wasn't much, just a square room with wood too old to shine and benches that creaked under judgment. But that day, it held something heavier than law. It held memory, mistrust, and a woman who had nothing left to lose. Hannah stood before the magistrate in a dress that smelled of smoke and dust. Her hands were empty. She brought no lawyer, no witnesses, only a folder of documents and a voice that didn't shake. "They say I gave land to an Apache," she began, her words even, eyes steady. "I didn't." A murmur ran through the room. Familiar faces turned away or leaned forward, not out of support but curiosity. She let them. "I gave him water," she said, "because he was dying, because no one else would." The magistrate frowned. Sheriff Maddox shifted in his chair. Brody smirked from the back row, arms folded like a man who already knew the outcome. Hannah laid the letter from her husband on the desk, then the map, then a second document one no one had expected, a will, signed, dated, sealed, leaving the land to her without contest. "This is mine," she said quietly. "The well, the fences, the decision of who crosses them." Stillness fell over the room like a dropped curtain. In the last row, Takoda sat motionless. He hadn't spoken a word since arriving, hadn't even looked directly at her. But the weight of his presence filled the space between every breath. One of the elders on the council cleared his throat. "No one is accusing you formally, Mrs. Moore." "No," she said, "just informally, with stones, with silence." Another pause. Longer this time. Outside, the wind rattled the window panes. Inside, something else was rattling, the certainty of those who thought they knew who the enemy was. The judge finally nodded. "This town is small," he said, "and small places fear change." Hannah didn't answer. She didn't need to. Her standing there unapologetic, alone but unshaken, was answer enough. When the room adjourned, people left slower than usual. A few glanced at Takoda. Some looked away quickly. Others didn't. No one said thank you. No one said sorry. But that day no one called her traitor. And that, in Dry Hollow, was a kind of progress. As she stepped outside, the sun lit the dust like gold. Takoda followed a few steps behind, silent as always. But in that space between them something had shifted. Autumn came slow to Dry Hollow, the kind of change that didn't paint the leaves but thinned the wind and cooled the earth. After the courthouse silence, life settled into a new rhythm, one less hostile but still cautious. The town didn't apologize, but it also didn't glare as much, and Hannah noticed the difference. At the market, Mrs. Delaney no longer turned her back. The blacksmith gave a tight nod instead of pretending not to see her. Even the sheriff stopped his horse outside her fence once, just for a moment, and tipped his hat before moving on. But the true change came quietly, like most things that mattered. It was early morning when she found it, left on the steps beside a bundle of firewood. A small leather pouch, worn soft by time. Inside, a pendant carved from turquoise, shaped like an eagle in flight. Its wings outstretched, its edges smooth. No note, no explanation. She didn't need one, she knew what it meant. The eagle wasn't just a bird in Apache lore. It was a protector, a messenger between earth and spirit. To be given its likeness, especially from someone like Takoda, was not romantic. It was sacred. It meant she was seen, not just as someone who gave water to a wounded man, but as someone who stood between worlds and stayed standing. She didn't cry, but her breath caught in her chest like a held prayer. That evening she wore the pendant, not for beauty, not to invite questions, but as a quiet promise to herself, to the land, to the people who once walked it long before her fence lines were drawn. A week later, 2 children wandered up her path with a broken wagon wheel. She helped them fix it. The next day, their father left a basket of apples on her porch. Small things, but real. The Reverend, once wary, asked her if she would speak at the church gathering, not about politics, not about faith, but about endurance. She declined but thanked him. Even Brody, bruised in ego and pride, kept his distance. Rumor was he'd lost favor with a few men on the council. Turns out, power in small towns runs on perception, and Hannah's quiet refusal to fold had given people a new story to whisper. One night she stood by the well, fingers tracing the eagle at her neck. The wind brushed her hair back and she felt, not peace exactly, but space. A room inside herself that had once been locked, now open. She had been wrong about one thing. Healing didn't come like thunder. It came like this, moment by moment, small and deliberate, witnessed only by those who chose to stay. Takoda never came to say goodbye. She didn't need him to. Some bonds didn't end with departures. Some weren't meant to be explained. They just lived in the objects left behind, in the rituals continued, in the way a woman drew water with steadier hands than before. In the end, the gift wasn't the necklace. It was the permission to keep. It was the kind of afternoon where time folded in on itself. The sun was low but not yet setting, casting a golden hush over everything it touched. Dry Hollow, for once, seemed to pause. No hammering in the distance, no children calling out, just the steady wind combing through dry grass. Hannah sat by the well, hands resting in her lap. The necklace lay quiet against her skin, its turquoise eagle catching bits of sunlight with each breath she took. Beside her, Takoda sat in silence. He hadn't announced his return, hadn't knocked. He simply came back like dusk, like instinct. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. The silence between them had changed over the weeks. Once filled with uncertainty, now it felt like a room they both understood. No walls, no questions, just presence. The wind tugged at the eagle pendant. It swayed slightly, casting a shadow over the stone rim of the well. Takoda's eyes followed it, but he said nothing. His gaze was steady, grounded. Not longing, not searching, just there. And Hannah, she smiled, not with her mouth, but in the way her shoulders eased, in the way her breath slowed, deepened. She didn't ask where he'd been. He didn't ask if she'd waited. Some answers live beyond language. They watched the water shimmer in the well. It caught the sky, bent it into ripples. It had been the first thing between them. It was still the only thing that didn't lie. No declarations passed their lips. No "I love you," no stay. But in the quiet, something far older than romance settled. A bond that had nothing to do with possession or promises. It was made of survival, of choice, of shared scars that didn't need naming. As the sun dipped lower, Hannah reached down and drew up a bucket. The water was cold, clear, and still smelled faintly of iron and earth. She offered him a cup. He took it. And in that exchange everything was said. No fanfare, no endings. Just two people at a well, letting the silence speak for them. Some stories end with thunder. This one ended like a breeze. No celebration, no grand declarations. Just a woman and a man once called strangers, sitting by a well that never stopped offering water. Dry Hollow didn't change overnight, but something in its soil had shifted, quietly, irrevocably, because someone chose to act from instinct, not instruction, from heart, not history. As the screen fades, you might find yourself asking, not loudly, not urgently, but somewhere deep where honest questions live. If it were me, would I offer the cup? To someone the world called enemy, to someone I didn't understand? Would I see the human first? The answer doesn't need to be perfect. It only needs to be real. Because maybe, just maybe, what shifts the course of lives isn't fury or speeches or even forgiveness. Maybe it's something simpler. A hand on a bucket, a silence shared, a single act of kindness, offered without demand, received without words, and remembered forever.